Chapter 20. Rain was falling in Arbelon, a slow, steady downpour that draped the city in a curtain of shimmering damp and hazy grey. It was mid-afternoon. The rain had begun at dawn, and now, more than 9 hours later, showed no signs of lessening. Shannara watched it from the seclusion of the king's summer home, his current retreat, his present hideaway. He watched it spatter on the window panes, on the walkways, in the hundreds of puddles it had already formed. He watched it transform the trees of the forest, turning their trunks a silky black and their leaves a vibrant green. It seemed to him, in his despondency, that if he watched it long and hard enough, it would transform him as well. His mood was foul. It had been so since his return to the city 3 days earlier. He had come home with the remnant of his battered company, with Prayer's style, Vree-Iridin, and the elven hunters, Oban and Rusk. He had carried back the black elfstone and the body of Tay Treppenwood. He had brought no joy with him and found none waiting. In his absence, Cortan Belendarek had died of his wound. His son, Elatan, had assumed the throne. His first order of business, to sally forth on an expedition dedicated to tracking down his father's killers. Madness. But no one had stopped him. Yerl was disgusted. It was the act of a fool, and he was afraid that the elves had inherited a fool for a king. Either that, or the elves once again had no king at all. Elatan Belendarek had departed Arbelon a week earlier, and there had been no word of him since. He stood in the silence and stared out the window at the rain, at the space between the falling drops, at the greyness, had nothing at all. His gaze was empty. The summer house was empty as well. Just him, alone in the silence with his thoughts. Not pleasant company for anyone. His thoughts haunted him. The loss of Tay was staggering, more painful than he could have imagined, deeper than he would let himself admit. Tay Treppenwood had been his best and closest friend all his life. No matter the choices they had made, no matter the length of their occupational separation, no matter the events that had transformed their lives, that friendship had endured. That Tay had become a druid while Yule had become captain of the home guard, and then court advisor to the king, had altered nothing. When Tay had come home from Paranor this final time, when Yule had first seen his friend riding up the roadway to Arbelon, it was as if only a few moments had passed since they last met. As if time meant nothing. Now Tay was gone. His life given so that his friends and companions could live, so that the black elfstone could be brought safely to Arbelon. The black elfstone, the killing weapon, a dark rage surged through Shannara as he thought of the cursed talisman. The cost of keeping the elfstones had been his friend's life, and he still had no concept of its purpose. For what use was it intended? What use that he could measure its worth against the loss of his dearest friend? He had no answer. He had done what he must. He had carried the elfstone back to Arbelon, keeping it from falling into the hands of the Warlock Lord, thinking all the way that it would be better if he were to rid himself of the magic, if he were to drop it down the deepest, darkest crevice he could find. He might have done so if he had been alone. So intense was his anger and frustration at the loss of Tay. But Breyer and Vree-Iridin accompanied him, and the care of the stone had been given over to them as well. So he had to carry it home as Tay had wanted, prepared to relinquish all claim to it at the moment he arrived. But fate worked against him in this as well. Cortan Belendarek was dead, and his successor's son was off on a fool's mission. To whom, then, should he give the elfstone? Not to the Elven High Council, a clutch of ineffectual, bickering old men who lacked foresight and reason, and were concerned mostly with protecting themselves, now that Cortan was dead. Not to Allerton, who was absent in any case. The Elfstone had never been intended for him. Bremen then, but the Druid had not yet arrived in Arbelon, if he was to arrive at all. So on Prayer's advice and with Bree Redden's concurrence, these two the only ones he could consult on the matter, he hid the Black Elfstone, deep in the catacombs of the palace cellars, down where no one could ever find it without his help, away from the prying eyes and curious minds that might attempt to unlock its power. Yule, Prayer, and the Locust understood the danger of the Elfstone as no other could. They had seen what the Elfstone's dark magic could do. They had witnessed firsthand the extent of its power. All those men, human and inhuman, ruined by the backlash despite his druid defences. Tay driven with such power was anathema. Such power was black and witless, and should be locked away forever. I hope it was worth your life, Tay, Yul Shannara thought bleakly, but I cannot conceive that it was. The chill of the rain worked through him, causing his bones to ache. The fire, the sole source of heat for the large gathering room, was dying in the hearth behind him, and he walked over to add a few more logs. He stared down into the rising flames. When he had done so, wondering at the vagaries of circumstance and fate, so much had been lost these past few weeks. What purpose had these losses served? Where would it all culminate? In what cause? Yule shook his head and brushed back his blonde hair. Philosophical questions only confused him. He was a warrior, and what he understood best was what he could strike out against. Where was the hard substance of this matter to be found? Where was its flesh and blood? He felt ruined, battered without, and empty within. The rain and the grey suited him. He was come back to nothing, to no purpose, to no recognisable future, to great loss and pain. On the day of his return, he had gone to Tay's parents and Kira to tell them of his death. He would have it no other way. Tay's parents, old and easily confused, had accepted the news stoically and with few tears, seeing with the approach of their end of their own lives the inevitability and conscious of death. But Kira had been devastated. She hung on to Yule as she cried, clutching him in desperation, seeking strength he did not have to give. He held her, thinking she was as lost to him as her brother. She clung to him, a crumpled bit of flesh and bone and cloth, as light as air and as insubstantial, sobbing and shaking. And he thought in that moment that their grief for Tay was all that they would ever share again. He turned from the fire and stared out the window once more. Grey and damp, the day wore on, and nothing of its passing gave hope. The front door opened and closed, a cloak was removed and hung, and Priya Starr walked into the room. Dampness glistened on her face and hands, on the smooth brown skin, still marred by the cuts and bruises of their journey to the brake line. She brushed at the water that beaded on her curly cinnamon hair, flicking it away. Honey-brown eyes studied him, as if surprised by what they saw. "They want to make you king," she declared quietly. He stared at her. "Who?" "All of them. The High Council, the King's advisors, the people on the streets, the Home Guard, the army, everyone." She smiled wanly. "You are their only hope, they say. Allerton is too unreliable, too reckless for the job. He has no experience. He has no skills. Doesn't matter that he is already king. They want him gone." "But 2 grandchildren survive after him. What of them?" "Babies, barely grown old enough to walk. Besides, the Elven people don't want children sitting on the Balandaric throne. They want you." He shook his head in disbelief. I haven't the right to make that decision. No one has. You do, she said. She crossed to the fire, her slim, supple body cat-like in the near gloom. All grace and efficiency. Yule marvelled at the ease of which she moved. He marvelled at her composure. He was awed by the depth of her strength. Even now, in the face of all that had happened, she stood before the fire, rubbing her hands to warm them. After a moment she stopped and just stared. I heard his voice today, she said. On the streets. Tay's voice. He was calling after me, speaking my name. I heard it clearly. I turned so eager to find him, I collided with a man following me. I pushed past him, ignoring what he said, looking for Tay. She shook her head slowly. But he wasn't there. I only imagined it. Her voice died away in a whisper. She did not turn. I still can't believe he's gone, Yule said after a moment. I keep thinking that it's a mistake, that he's out there and any moment he will walk through the door. He looked off into the shadows of the front entry. I don't want to be king. I want Tay to be alive again. I want everything back the way it was. She nodded wordlessly and watched the fire some more. They could hear the patter of the rain on the roof and against the window glass. They could hear the whisper of the wind. Then Freya turned and walked over to him. She stood before him, motionless. He could not read the look she gave him. It was filled with so many emotions that it lacked definition. Do you love me? She asked directly, staring into his eyes. He was so surprised by the question, so caught off guard that he could now not manage an answer. He just stared at her, open-mouthed. She smiled, laying claim to something that had eluded him. Her eyes filled with tears. Did you know that Tay was in love with me? He shook his head slowly, stunned. No. For as long as I can remember, she paused. Just as you've always been in love with Kira, she reached up quickly and put a finger to his lips. No, let me finish. This needs to be said. Tay was in love with me, but he would never have done anything about it. He wouldn't even speak of it. His sense of loyalty to you was so strong that he couldn't make himself. He knew I was pledged to you, and even though he was uncertain of your own feelings, he did nothing to interfere. He believed that you loved me and you would marry me, and he would not jeopardize his relationship with either of us to change that. He knew of Kira, but he knew as well that she was not right for you, even when you did not. She came a step closer. The tears were beginning to run down her cheeks now, but she ignored them. That was a side of Tay Treppenwood you never saw. You didn't see it because you didn't look. He was a complex man, just as you are. Neither of you understood the other as clearly as you thought. You were each the shadow of the other, but as different in some ways as the shadow is from the flesh. I know that difference. I have always known. She swallowed. Now you have to face up to it as well, and to what it means to be alive when your shadow is dead. Tay's gone, Yule. We remain. What is to become of us? We have to decide. Tay loved me, but he is dead. Do you love me as well? Do you love me as strongly? Or will Kira always be between us? Kira's married, he said softly, his voice breaking. Kira is alive. Life breeds hope. If you want her badly enough, perhaps you can find a way to have her. But you cannot have both of us. I've lost one of the two most important men in my life. I lost him without ever taking time to speak with him as I am speaking with you. I will not let that happen a second time. She paused, uncomfortable with what she was about to say, but refusing to look away. I'm going to tell you something. If Tay had asked me to choose between you, I might have chosen him. There was an endless silence between them, their eyes locked and held. They stood in the centre of the room, motionless. The fire in the hearth cracked softly, and the rain beat down. The shadows in the room had begun to lengthen with the approach of nightfall. "I do not want to lose you," Yul said quietly. Priya did not respond. She was waiting to hear more. "I did love Kira once," he admitted. "I love her still, I suppose. But it's not the same as it was. I know I have lost her, and I no longer mourn that loss. I haven't for years. I care for her. I think of her when I think of Tay and our childhood. She was part of that, and I would be foolish if I tried to pretend that it was otherwise." He took a deep breath. "You asked me if I loved you. I do. I haven't really thought about it in any deliberate way. I just always accepted it. I suppose I believed that you would always be there, and so dismissed any further consideration as unnecessary. Why examine something that was so obvious? There seemed no need to do so. But I was wrong. I see that. I took you for granted without even realizing it. I thought that what we shared was sufficient as it was. I didn't allow for change or doubts or complacency. But I have lost Tay and a large part of myself with him. I have lost direction and purpose. I am come to the end of a road I have travelled for a long time and find no way to turn. When you ask if I love you, I am faced with the fact that loving you is perhaps all I have left. It is no small thing, no consolation to measure against my pain. It is so much more than that. I feel foolish saying this. It is the one real truth I can acknowledge. It means more than anything else in my life. Tay let me discover this by dying. It is a high cost to pay. But there it is. His big hands reached out and fastened gently on her shoulders. "I do love you, Priya." "Do you?" she asked quietly. He felt a vast distance open between them as she spoke the words. He felt an immense weight settle on his shoulders. He stood awkwardly in front of her, unable to think of what else he could do. His size and strength had always been a source of reassurance, but with Priya they seemed to work against him. "Yes, Priya," he said finally. "I do. I love you as much as I have ever loved anyone. I don't know what else to say. This, I guess, that I hope you still love me." She said nothing even then, standing there motionless before him, looking into his eyes. The tears had stopped, but her face was streaked and damp. A tiny smile lifted the corners of her mouth. "I have never stopped loving you," she whispered. She stepped forward into his arms and let him hold her. After a while, she held him back. They were sitting together before the fire when Vri Eredin appeared several hours later. It was dark by then. The last of the daylight faded. The rain lessened to a drizzle that fell without sound on the already drenched woodlands. The silence had fallen across the weary city, and lights had begun to appear in the windows of buildings, barely glimpsed through gaps in the sagging, water-laden boughs of the trees. No one lived in the palace now, the building empty while repairs were made, and a ruler determined. And only the summer house saw life within the ground. Even so, the home guard watched over your Shannara, come to protect one of their own as much to protect a member of the royal family and a rumoured king-to-be. The guard stopped, rear-ridden 3 times before he reached the door to the summer house, letting him pass then only because Yul had made certain that the locate was to be given free access to him at all times. It was strange how their relationship had changed. They had little in common, and Tay's death might easily have ended any pretense at friendship between them, for the Druid elf was a source of any bonding they had forged on their journey west. With Tay dead, they might have drifted apart again, each suspicious and disdainful of the other, each drawing back into himself. But that had not happened. Perhaps it was their unspoken individual resolve that it should not happen, that they owed Tay this much. Perhaps it was a common need that bound them, a need to understand the terrible events of their journey, a need to make something good come out of their friend's death. Tay had sacrificed himself for them. Shouldn't they put aside their differences for his sake? They talked of many things on their return, of what their friend had done, of the importance he had attached to carrying out Bremen's charge, of the deadly nature of the Black Elfstone, of its place in the greater scheme of things, of the darkening shadow of the Warlock Lord hanging over them all. With Praestall they talked of what Tay had hoped to accomplish, and how they must see that his goals were realized. To see that the Black Elfstone reached Bremen, and that the Elven army was dispatched in aid of the dwarves. Their thoughts were not of themselves, but of the greater world and the danger that threatened it. 2 nights out of Avalon, on their return from the breakline, Yule asked the Locust if he could reveal to him any visions or whisperings hereafter that might affect what they had agreed to try to accomplish. It was not easy for him to ask, and Vreeredin knew it. The Locust said after a few moments' reflection that he would do anything in his power to help. He would like, in fact, to offer his services to Yule personally. If the other thought he might have use of them, Yule accepted the offer. They shook hands to seal the agreement, and though they would not say so, the beginnings of their friendship. So here was the Locust, come for the first time in 2 days, stepping in out of the rain like a beaten creature, his worn cloak soaked clear through, his small, thin form hunched and shivering. Bran met him at the door, took his cloak away, and led him to the fire so that he might warm himself. Yule poured a measure of strong ale and gave it to him. Prayer wrapped him in a blanket. Vreeredin accepted all with muttered thanks and furtive looks. His eyes were intense. He had come to them for a reason. I have come to tell you something, he said to Yule after the chill had left him sufficiently that he could speak without shaking. I have had a vision, and it involves you. Yule nodded. What have you seen? The Locust rubbed his hands together, then drank some of the ale. A few sips only. His face was pinched and his eyes deep set and hollow, as if he hadn't been sleeping well, but he looked haunted ever since their return from the breakline. The events in the Two Magna had devastated his sight. The fortress and its occupants had attacked him mercilessly, tried to crush him so that he would be of no use to Tay Triffenwood, whom they had intended for their own. But they had failed. The damage to the Locust from their attack was evident. When Tay first came to me to solicit my help in a search for the Black Elfstone, I used my skills to look into his mind. Vreeredin shifted suddenly to face the other, his gaze unexpectedly steady. It was a way to discover quickly and accurately what it was that he believed I might find. I did not tell him what I was doing. I did not want him to shade any truth that he possessed. What I discovered was more than I sought. He had been told by the Druid Bremen of 4 visions. One was of the Jew Magna and the Black Elfstone. This was the one that I was supposed to see. But I saw the others as well. I saw the destruction of Paranor as Bremen searched for a medallion that hung from a chain. I saw the Druid again at a dark lake. He trailed off, then brushed aside what he was about to say with a quick, anxious wave of his hand. Never mind. Either of those. It was the last that matters. He paused, distracted. I have heard talk. The Elves would make you king. They would be done with Ellerton and the grandchildren and crown you. Just talk, nothing more. Yule interjected quickly. Vreeredin folded him into himself beneath his robes. I don't think so. He let the words hang. Pray edge forward beside Yule. What have you seen, Bree? Is Ellerton Ballandaric dead? The Locust shook his head. I don't know. I wasn't shown that. I was shown something else, but it impacts on the matter of kingship. He took a deep breath. The vision, Bremen's last, that I glimpsed within Tay's memory was of a man standing on a battlefield, armed with a sword. The sword was a talisman, a powerful magic. The Eldruin's image of a hand holding forth the burning torch was graven on the pommel of the sword, clearly revealed. Across from the man was a wraith, cloaked all in black, featureless and impenetrable, save for the eyes that were pinpricks of red fire. The man and the wraith were engaged in mortal combat. He sipped again as his ale, and now his gaze dropped away. I only had a single glimpse of this vision, and it did not pay it much mind. It was not important then. It gave credence to the rest of what Tay told me of his quest, nothing more. I had not really thought about it again, until now. The dark eyes lifted. Today I read my maps before the fire. The warmth of the flames and the rain falling outside in steady cadence caused me to doze, and as I slept, I had a vision. It was sudden, intense, and unexpected. This is unusual because mostly the visions, the hunches, the indicators of what is lost and might be found are slower and more gentle in their coming. But this vision was sharp, and I recognized it immediately. It was Bremen's vision of the man and the wraith on the battlefield, but this time I knew them. The wraith was the warlock lord. The man, your Shannara, was you. You wanted to laugh. For some reason it struck him as ridiculous. Perhaps it was an impossibility of the idea. Perhaps it was his inability to believe that Tay had not recognized him in the vision. Yet, Vree had. Perhaps it was simply a reaction to the twinge of misgiving he felt on hearing the Lokit's words. There is more. The Lokit did not give him time to think. The sword you carried bore the emblem of the medallion that Bremen carried in the vision of Paranoid destroyed. The medallion is called the Eldruin. It is a symbol of office at the High Druids of Paranoids. Magic is very powerful. The sword was a weapon forged to destroy Bronar, and the Eldruin was made of part of that weapon. No one told me these things, you understand. No one said they were so. I simply knew them to be true. Just as I seeing you standing on that battlefield for that single moment in time, that you had become king of the elves. No, Yul shook his head stubbornly. You are mistaken. The Lokit faced him and did not look away. Did you see my face? I did not need to see your face, Vree declared softly. Or hear your voice, or look about to see if others followed you as they would their king. It was you. Then the vision itself is false. It must be. You'll look to prayer for help. But her response to his gaze was deliberate. Silence. His fist knotted angrily. I do not want to be any part of this. No one spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the night was deep and still, as if listening covertly to what was taking place. An eavesdropper waiting to see what would happen. Yul rose and walked to the window. He stood looking out at the trees and the mist. He tried to will himself to disappear. If I were to let them make me king... He did not finish. Bray arose and stood looking across the room at him. It would give you a chance to accomplish the things Tay Treppenwood could not. If you were king, you could persuade the High Council to send the elves to give aid to the dwarves. If you were king, you could dispose of the Black Elfstone at a time and place of your own choosing and not be answerable to any. Most important of all, you would have an opportunity to destroy the Warlock Lord. Shannara's head snapped around quickly. The Warlock Lord destroyed the Druids. What chance would I have against a thing so monstrous? A better chance than anyone else can think of, she answered at once. The vision has been shown twice now, once to Bremen, once to Vri. Perhaps this is prophetic. If so, then you have a chance to do something that not even Tay could do. You have a chance to save us all. He stared at her. She was telling him what she believed he would be king. She was saying that he must. She was asking him to agree with her. She is right, Bree reddened said softly, but Yor wasn't listening to him. He continued to stare at Prayer, thinking back to several hours earlier when she had demanded that he make his choice on a different matter. How much do I mean to you? How important am I? Now she was asking the questions again. The words altered only slightly. How much do your people mean to you? How important are they to you? He was aware of a sudden, precipitous shift in both the nature of their relationship and the direction of his life, both brought about by Tay Treppenwood's death. Events he would never have dreamed possible had conspired to create this shift. Fate, a willful and deliberate sort, had settled her hands squarely on his shoulders. Responsibility, leadership, and the hopes of his people all hung in the balance of the decision demanded of him. His mind raced in search of answers that would not come, but he knew with certainty that was terrifying, that whatever choice he made, it would haunt him, always. You must stand and face this, Prayer said suddenly. You must decide. He felt as if the world was spinning out of control. She asked too much of him. There was not yet need to decide anything. Any present need was fueled by rumours and speculation. No formal overture had been made concerning the kingship. Allerton's fate was not determined. What of Gordon Ballandaric's grandchildren? Tay Treffenwood himself had saved their lives. Were they to be cast aside without a thought? His own mind was not made up on any of this. He could barely conceive what he was being asked to consider. But his thoughts had a hollow and ill-considered ring to them, and in the silence of their aftermath, he found himself face to face with the grinning spectre of his own desperation. He turned away from the two who waited for him to speak and looked out the window into the night. No answer would come.